Today's episode is sponsored by Future State Media, experts in off-Amazon traffic for Amazon sellers. Future State Media will build you a custom-made website to deliver sales for you on Amazon. Built to grab traffic from search engines and social media, your site can be used as a secret weapon for launching products on Amazon or just to stabilize your Amazon sales. It means you can also build an email list on autopilot. Go to futurestatemedia.com for your free guide to Google SEO for Amazon sellers today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the new show, the 10K Collective podcast. This is a podcast for advanced sellers and people who are serious about scaling their business. So delighted to have the right person for that. We're going to talk about developing your own truly unique product as opposed to just private labeling something. It's the natural step after private label, not an easy one, but we need an expert guide. Unfortunately, we have that in Ryan Shaffett of XQ Manufacturing. So Ryan, warm welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Michael. Glad to be talking to you today.
Yeah, great to have you on, and thanks for coming and giving us some time. I believe you're coming to us from China today. Is that right?
That's correct.
So tell us a little bit more about what's behind that, because I know you've got quite a deep China background. Give us a bit of flavor of what you've been doing for the last 10, 15 years of your life.
I've actually been living in China for 18 years now. This is where I've lived most of my professional life. Came here just out of college, and 14 years ago, I started my business. It was an amazing learning experience for me, especially those first few years, getting our feet under us and developing our business. And just in the last 3 or 4 years, we've really been getting into, really the last 2 years, just the whole world of supplying FBA-based businesses. And
Okay.
so we're...
So I was going to say, so FBA is quite a new thing for you. So you've got a much deeper background in doing other things outside the FBA space then.
Right. We're a general manufacturer. We produce goods across a very wide band of products. But yeah, so the FBA focus, which currently makes up about clients who have their primary business focused with FBA, makes up roughly 40% of our clientele right now, but it's the fastest growing element of our client base right now.
Okay, interesting. So there's quite a wave going on then. You're seeing from the manufacturing end that the FBA sellers are finally getting around to the idea of creating unique products. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. I think with the smaller companies, it's more of a new idea to them as they process through it and still use a lot of the private labeling language and
Hi, Ryan. You seem to have frozen. Oh, God, it's my bastard internet. Unacceptable. I must get better internet. God damn it. I can't run a business like this. Hi, Ryan. Are you there?
I am back.
Sorry. Yeah, I think it might be an internet at my end. I'm so embarrassed. I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to get
That's right. It happened.
Let's do it again. So you were saying about private label language. I tell you what, it's going to be easier for editing purposes if we just go back to my original question, which wasn't particularly well phrased anyway. Let's just restart that bit.
Sure. Wherever you want to start from.
Sure. So Ryan, it sounds like private label sellers, or formerly private label sellers, or FBA sellers, are coming around to getting products made for them. Is that a trend that you're seeing coming from your end?
Yeah, I would say definitely. For our 2 largest clients they've had their own brand for a while. I think their business model kind of predates some FBA focus, but currently they're FBA focused. So for them, they're a bit more familiar with custom manufacturing. But for the wide variety of smaller clients that we deal with, it does seem custom manufacturing does seem to be more of a new concept that they're trying to figure out and wade through as we work with them.
Right. So custom manufacturing is the key word that we should be using. Is that the sort of main term that?
That's the word I've traditionally used. We'd mentioned before that just another nice term is a private manufactured products, which is just a little bit of a play off of private labeling, but with some very key distinctives.
Okay, so that leads to the obvious question of what are the key distinctives then, or the key distinctions?
Excellent. Well, so for some of the advantages that you're going to have if you're going to develop your own product personally, I mean, when people are private labeling, obviously the opportunities for hijacking, for other people coming in with the same products and just competing on who can spend the most advertising or push in the most reviews is a very typical model, especially for small businesses to wade through. But when we're into custom manufacturing, you're going to have a product that's truly unique. It's not going to be the same thing as somebody else with a different label on it, obviously. When you're going this far back up the supply chain, instead of dealing with distributors or middlemen, of course, you're going to typically see a higher profit margin as well. And then also, hopefully, if you're in a product niche, you're going to know your niche well. You're going to know where the opportunities for improvements are. You're going to be reading your clients' feedback on your and your competitors' posts. You're going to know how this product needs to be tweaked to get the best product possible, or even maybe meet a market need that there's a little bit of a void in right now that you see, combining products or just improving it in any given way. So those would be the big positives, but there's also some different challenges if you're looking at custom manufactured product versus just sourcing. It doesn't matter if you're sourcing from a middleman or if you're sourcing from a distributor on Alibaba. The process of custom manufacturing is still going to be different from a sourcing type relationship. And what are those negatives? Is that going to be the next question?
I was going to say, before we dig into that, I mean, certainly we need to know what the downsides are, but I think let's just reflect a bit on why it's worth bothering in the first place, because obviously this is going to be a bigger undertaking than just sourcing. But I think you just pointed out a distinction, which is this is not so much a sourcing exercise as in finding what's out there. It's an exercise in co-creating, I suppose, in a way, isn't it? So it's a different relationship. But as you said, the fact that you can put a ring around things in terms of the competitive nature of Amazon now, and that the higher profit margins, because as you put it, going further back in the supply chain, it's a very interesting way of looking at things in terms of business models. I think to talk about where you are in the supply chain, I think that's a very good sort of rule of thumb, because retail arbitrage, obviously you're very, very close to the consumer. You're just flipping things from some Walmart or whatever. Wholesale, you have a relationship with distributors. Private labeling, you think you've got a relationship with the factory, but it's probably with an agent in China, right? And then I guess when it comes to custom manufacturing, you really have got to go right back to the source. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit of a mess in some ways.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about then the downsides of that, or the costs of that, because obviously having higher profit and being more defensible is incredibly important. And I can't stress that enough to anyone who's relatively new to the space who's still listening to podcasts. I mean, anyone who's been around the block for more than 6 months will know how critical that is. So what are the costs we have to pay for that?
Well, one of the major costs that you'd be looking at would be the time cost. So when you're looking at sourcing something, you're going to a Chinese middleman or a Chinese factory, and they've either got ready goods or they're ready to go. But when you're talking about something that you see in the market as a market opportunity, and so we need to go into prototyping, then we might need to go into mold development, and then we're going to start manufacturing product. So instead of a typical turnaround of maybe 1-2 weeks dealing with a Chinese supplier, or 1 day with a U.S. distributor, you're going to be looking at a process that every project's different, and I can't stress that enough. But something that's going to take anywhere from 1 to 4 months, or maybe even longer if it's really a multiple prototype kind of situation where we're sending you a prototype, you're giving us feedback on it, we're tweaking some things again. And then mold development itself can take a month or so, depending on the complexity of the product. If you need a mold, again, every project's different. So there's the time cost for sure. Then the money cost. Well, every project is very much different. But this is actually, so if you're looking at making a plastic product with plastic injection molding, you're going to spend anywhere from $1,000 to, of course, there's no top end of this, but 10,000, 20,000 is all typical numbers as well. But that actually prevents a barrier for the small FBA seller that's just a middleman doing small numbers, they're not going to be ready to jump in and do a mold development. So as you said, it makes it a bit more defensible investing in that cost. And actually, to speak of another advantage as well, as you were saying earlier, with when you're dealing, let's say, with a supplier you meet off of Alibaba, maybe they're a factory, maybe they're not. Both exist in that world. But another distinctive where custom manufacturing is different is that you're the one developing the product. You are the mold owner. So if I develop a mold on my own, if I design a product on my own, I'm going to charge the clients I'm selling to for all the time and energy I put into that, as well as my mold costs. Now, if my client's coming to me with an idea and saying, this is what we want to do, and we quote them on the mold costs, and they're the ones investing in that, well, they own it all. And we have a different price structure that we create in those situations where it's a client driven project versus something that we would develop on our own.
It's just to summarize that then, it sounds like the main thing is that we're looking at upfront costs that are higher, certainly much longer timescales. But the advantage of that isn't just a barrier to entry for everybody else, which is obviously incredibly important, given that the low barrier to entry on Amazon is kind of cool if you're the person entering and really bad if you're the incumbent, the person who's trying to defend the market share, right? But so that's a great plus. But also it sounds like you pay up front. So you pay a lot of money up front, but then presumably the unit costs, if you're getting a mold made for $10,000, the unit costs are actually going to be much lower. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and like with plastic products, they're just the per piece price is just so surprisingly low when you've developed the mold yourself, typically.
Amazing. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I just want to let that sink in because for a lot of us, and that would absolutely be me, I confess, I've never really developed a unique product. I mean, I've done tiny tweaks to products in it, and they mostly went fairly wrong. When I went off it's surprisingly wrong when I changed what I thought were incredibly superficial features. Everything seemed to melt down, which we can maybe talk about in a second. But yeah, the difference I think is quite profound that you've just flagged up, which is the money you spend, I guess, if you average it over a significant number of units or time, would end up being about the same, but it's weighted very much up the front end. Is that a fair summary?
Well, I think tweak your summary a little bit and say, if you're looking at significant units, it's definitely going to end up being cheaper for you in the long run to develop a mold. So we're talking a lot about plastic-based products as a good example. Again, everything's different, textiles and whatnot, but if you're doing a plastic product, the first question we're going to ask is, well, before we make the mold, is how many units are you predicting here? Because if you're making a small key-shaped object, we could do a mold for $1,000. But if you're going to run, if in a year you're hoping to sell 1 million of these little key-shaped objects, the mold that we're going to make for this, we're actually going to make a cavity mold that's going to have maybe 20 different keys in it all at once. And so if we're making a mold that's this big for a key with a single indentation in it, a single product coming out of it, the per piece price is going to be maybe 10 cents, 15 cents. I mean, we're making up numbers here based on the thickness, but if we have a mold with 20 cavities in it, we're talking like 2-3 cents a piece. The whole equation changes. So there's a lot of different ways to go about that. So all that's to say, if you're investing in the mold on the front end, in the long run, if you're really doing enough quantity, it's going to be cheaper than even buying from a factory that has an existing mold. It should be, at least.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I guess, that's the entire point. If you get to the most primitive sense of where am I at in the supply chain, if you're a person buying something, for example, I'm buying a microphone to use as a podcaster, I don't want 10,000 in my house. I don't need them. I just want to buy one unit, and therefore it's going to cost me, $99 in the case of this microphone or whatever. And then I guess if I'm a retailer in a local shop, I don't really want 10,000 units either because I can't shift them, but I might want 100 a month, and therefore it's okay to buy them for $50 and sell them for 100. And so there is a certain remorseless logic about if you're really serious about scale that actually the per unit cost is going to end up cheaper because you own more of the supply chain, if you like. So, I mean, this probably so really stupidly obvious to you, having done it for whatever 18 years. I mean, to me, this is still a revelation. Maybe that shows how stupid I am. But I suppose I've been brainwashed into the private label model for 4 years. So I'm just hammering this home for those who suffer from the same affliction. So tell me a little bit more about this thing that you were just talking about. So if you're thinking, projecting forward, doing, tons of units, that you would change the mold that you create. I mean, how does one begin to figure that kind of stuff out?
Well, that's a conversation that we're going to have with the client. We're going to talk through that. We're going to give them some options. So another disadvantage about the private custom manufacturing model is that you can't try out the market with as easily. With buying 10 units, see how fast they sell. You have to you're making a commitment up front. So one model that a client might do is they want to try it out. Maybe they'll just spend $1,000 on that single piece mold and that single cavity mold. And that allows them to try it out. Now, if it really hits big, if it's really one of those winner products, then they might come back and they develop the 20-piece mold. If your product's bigger, if your product's bigger than a bread box, most everything's a one cavity mold. So there's a lot of different equations there. But if you're doing a key shape product, we're probably going to quote you on 3 different options. This is what it would cost you up front and per piece for a 1 cavity mold, a 5 cavity mold, and a 20 cavity mold. You make the call. How much do you want to invest? How much confidence do you have in this product? How do you think you might want to tweak it for a second generation 6 months from now for a second generation product?
So that's yeah, I like what you're saying there. I mean, yeah, you can't try the market out, but you can still sort of scale up from single cavity mold, which is obviously the upfront cost is a lot cheaper, but the per unit or the per piece price is. I can tell you've been in China for a while because you say the word piece very naturally. Everyone else talks about units, but yeah, same thing. If anyone's listening, he's confused by that distinction, I think. Yeah, single cavity mold, cheaper upfront, but more per unit. So there is still a way, in other words, to scale from a moderate commitment to a more serious commitment to a really big commitment based on market feedback, right? That sounds like that's what you're saying. Okay.
That's a good summary.
And the other thing to say is that nobody, and this is above all, the thing that I've realized is that lots of people teach different business models, retail arbitrage, private label, custom manufacturing. There's probably something else like build your own factory course coming out next week. But, the truth is, I think there's no reason.
You got something. Let's start it.
Yeah, you would be the person to create that course. But I mean, there are a few people famously who started off private labeling and ended up just literally building their own factory. I mean, it's pretty damn rare, but it does exist. But I mean, even Will Chernlin and his brother famously owned their own warehouses because they borrowed them from their folks, which is kind of unusual. And again, that does exist. So I suppose what I'm saying is, though, there is no reason to be rigidly tied to one level or other of commitment to a type of product, right? You can start off retail arbitraging something and end up doing custom manufactured products. I mean, I know several friends of mine who've got into that in exactly the same way. So, I mean, I think that's not a major downside for me, as long as you don't go straight into custom manufacturing without any knowledge of a marketplace. I guess that's not such a big problem, I would say.
Yeah, that's one of the other disadvantages. If you're investing in a product and it ends up not to have the market you thought it would be, obviously that's the downside.
Yeah, I mean, everything's got its cost, right? Let's talk a little bit more. I mean, tell us a bit more about some of this manufacturing terminology you're coming up with. I mean, you mentioned plastic products and molds and cavities. I mean, without obviously, I'm not expecting to become a mechanical engineer out of the end of this, but could you just give us an overview of the different manufacturing techniques that would be applied to different materials and the sort of implications for somebody with a sort of small business person head on?
Well, first, let me say that one thing what we try to set ourselves apart as a company is just being able to communicate with our clients. And so we work with a lot of different clients. Some of our clients are already experts in their product area. They're sending us detailed product specification charts, CAD drawings, whatever, and quality control standards. And we work with that. We also work with clients to have some hand sketch drawings, some general concepts. They see a market opportunity and we have conversations with them about how to develop it. But we try to set ourselves apart. Obviously, as a U.S. run manufacturer in China, we're obviously pretty unique. And so we can come alongside and work our clients through a lot of the terminologies and the decisions that they're going to have to make and guide them the best. We see that if our clients are going to have success, we've got their mold in our hands, we're going to be the best solution to continue manufacturing. We want to see them move from that 100 unit mark to that million unit mark, because that's good for everyone. But so terminology, yeah. So multi-material products are where we love to be when we're not just making a single material product, but something that's a bit more, slightly more complicated in its assembly. So we do some basic electronics sometimes. Electronics investment is a bit more in developing your circuit boards and everything. So that's something we don't do a ton of. But there's the electronics and circuit development boards for developing your circuit boards for that. Then we've got wood-based products, which are fairly easy. Wood crafting, luckily, is not the most complicated rocket science in the world. We deal with a lot of plastic and rubber, so those are generally plastic injection molded. Occasionally, you can get into extruded products, which just basically means that the shape is continuous. It's a two-dimensional shape stretched out long, flat board or a tube or a U-shaped channel or whatever it be. So we often use those in other products. The setup costs for extruded products are less than for plastic injection molding, for the injection process. Then we can also get into machining different materials. Machining typically comes with metalwork, but you can also machine plastic products as well. So yeah, machined metal is obviously a huge part of a lot of products. You can also cast things as well, but machining is a very common process for a lot of the products you might see on FBA, and forging and bending and all sorts of things. And then textiles. We have our own in-house general assembly and our own textile factory here as part of our facilities, and a small woodworking workshop as well. And so textiles, we love textiles because it's something we're very competent in. Bags and tents and all sorts of things involve a textile element to them. Those are the broad areas that we work across. Foam, pouring foam is a big thing. We make a lot of archery targets that are poured foam into animal shapes and things like that. So the foam expands, and it's got a lot of elasticity to it. It's a special type of foam that allows it to heal well when you pull the arrows out. But the pouring foam works in a lot of different products. So those products typically take up a lot of volume, but are pretty low, but are one of the lowest cost items you can get per cubic meter.
Okay, so let's just take a second to absorb some of this stuff and just reflect back. I mean, obviously, again, to people with a sort of engineering background, some of this stuff will seem unbelievably basic, but I mean, a lot of us do not have that. So yeah, basic electronics sometimes, and I guess, as you said, that's investing in the circuit board. Nice to know that wood-based products are fairly easy, because I got the feeling from the marketing perspective that because there's such a huge sort of general drive towards sustainable and environmentally friendly products and stuff, I mean, there's probably a perception of those as being somehow more sustainable. I'm sure that's probably the opposite to the truth, but yeah, so that's quite...
Yes and no, I think is the answer to that.
Right. I guess it depends where the wood comes from, right? And yeah, that's a conversation.
Bamboo is a very common wood-based product that's billed as very environmentally friendly, and it generally is. So yeah, bamboo's a popular thing, and obviously China's the #1 place where bamboo products are coming out of. So we do both bamboo textile products, because there's a textile yarn you can make out of bamboo, and then there's also wooden bamboo products, which coasters, fans. We've done a variety of things out of that.
Okay,
When you export wooden products out of China, there's some basic minimums. They're not very high, but some basic minimums, because China needs to do wood inspections to make sure the wood was lawfully harvested And so there's a couple $100 worth of just inspection fees before something goes out when you're dealing with wood.
Okay, but that sounds pretty straightforward. I mean, so wood is actually an interesting material to consider from that point of view. Because I'm always looking at things I try and look at the sort of holistic perspective from the top of the business down, which is if you can find a product that is, I suppose it's the blue ocean strategy idea without being pretentious about it. I mean, in other words, so if it's low cost to us because it's straightforward and easy to inspect, and the certification level is fairly basic, but it's also higher perceived value by the consumer. That's a sweet spot to be in, right? So I'm always trying to look for those sweet spots. So wood sounds quite interesting to me, and especially bamboo. As you say, for textiles, it's all the rage. Bamboo socks, you name it. So that's interesting. And then which of these things we talked about, plastic and rubber and metal, is there, and this is the primitive dumb question, but forgive me, is there a particular type of material that is generally more expensive and or more complex to work with, to put it in simple terms?
Well, as mentioned before, I mean, plastics are really cheap to mass produce once you get that initial investment in with your molds. Metal machining, sometimes it's also just the process. Machining a metal, each piece that you go through is going to take the same amount of time on a machine. So those processes can be a little bit more per piece. If you're making a box, to make that box out of foam or plastic is going to be super cheap. Wood's going to be a little more expensive. Metal is probably going to be a little bit more expensive, especially if you're machining it. Sometimes you get those little tin boxes that are folded, which can be more of a different type of automation that you can do those on.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So basically, the advantage of plastic is the most mass producible kind of material in the sense that the mold is the thing, but the material itself, I guess the word plastic, we forget that it was originally used, and the Germans use it, for example, in plastic arts, meaning stuff made in 3D. And it's a very broadly based term. And I suppose what it means is it's a material that can be plastically moved. In other words, it's very flexible, it's very moldable. I guess that's kind of the essence of the stuff, right? I guess that's why that was invented, because we'll forget that before whatever it was, celluloid was invented, everything was made of metal, wood, and whatever else, I suppose. So there's something intrinsic about the material that is therefore basically around the cost is up front, it's about the mold, and then everything else is cheap, right? That's the basic nature of plastic, if I'm understanding you.
Well, you pointed out a good thing there, that there are a lot of different types of plastics to deal with. When you're looking at making a suitcase, a rollerboard that you take on an airplane, you want to be very careful about what plastic you choose for that if you're doing it out of plastic. ABS is a very common material because it's very hard. You can hit it with a hammer and nothing's going to happen to it. But if you did that same suitcase out of PE, I don't even know if you could do a mold that large without it. It would bend and warp. But you take a hammer to that and everything's just going to come apart right away.
So tell us about the types of plastic then. So ABS, PE, can you just break this down for us a little bit and give us some examples of real world products that would be made there? Because
no. I'm not the best engineer in the company, but just a few general types. So ABS is a very hard plastic. So you actually need to make a more robust mold if you're gonna do an ABS, because the pressure needed to fill up that mold is going to be a lot more. So we have to use a harder steel for that, which takes more machining time. So you can double your mold cost if you're dealing with if you need to fill it with a hard plastic like ABS. PE is one of your cheaper types. It can be stiff and rather brittle. PU is going to be a little bit more flexible. And there's low density poly PU and there's high density PU. But that's got a little bit more flex to it. We make a product that can be hit by a golf club, a sporting good product, and it has to have a lot of bounce to it. So we need to choose the right type of plastic to make that happen, and it's a very special type.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously just massive amounts of how can I put it? Well, general expertise and experience that comes. I mean, okay, yeah, you may not be an engineer, but you've lived in this world a long time, so you're talking a lot of sense. And if you were an engineer, you'd probably just start talking in a way that would cease to make sense to me or anyone listening very quickly, I suspect.
hopefully I'm a good middle ground there. We have our engineers on staff, and one of my main jobs is to be a communicator.
Yeah,
Because
well,
my main job, most of my job is related to sales and connecting with
yeah,
clients.
but I think good sales is and communication. As I remember speaking to a coach of mine years ago, who was, to be fair, a sales coach and a remarkably salesy oriented person, but he said coaching and selling, same thing. And I think to some extent, selling and communicating, it often comes to the same thing. I mean, if you're not getting a sale, it's often because you're not very, very clearly communicating why somebody should buy your thing and why it's different from anybody else. So just to, as an aside there, I think, yeah, you are doing a lovely job of communicating this stuff, I think. So let's bring a little bit more onto what you guys do. I mean, it's not a big sort of pitch necessarily for you guys, but it's something for people to explore working with somebody who can guide them through the process. What are the main sort of pain points that you've seen with people, say, coming from a private label background? So they have some experience of products. They certainly understand the markets on Amazon and possibly eBay or through e-commerce stores. They have some understanding of the basics of manufacturing, but they want to develop a custom product. What do you think their main, say, 3 pain points are that they generally would experience?
We talked a little bit about timing and how that's different. I've had clients that I've started working with, and we get some of their product going. We put it on one of our containers to the U.S., and then the client's like, "Hey, I need this product by Christmas. This other product I want to introduce, and it's really important. You have to find a way to get it done." And I'm thinking, your boat just left yesterday, and we haven't even started talking about a mold yet. Or we haven't even talked about the prototype or whatever. And so that was a hard thing for that client to accept. He's like, no, you don't understand how important this is. You don't understand how good this opportunity is going to be. And unfortunately, I didn't have an answer that was going to solve that problem for that client.
Yeah, I think there's a classic thing that they say in dealing with the Chinese, that if you seem to be in a hurry, then this is going to go badly for you. Apart from anything else, they're super sharp business people, and they will normally pick up on the fact that you're in a hurry and raise the price. But then also, yeah, this stuff takes time, and I know from speaking with friends of mine who develop unique products that the timescales cannot be really seriously compressed. I mean, we every so often I get together in groups of some pretty advanced people, and we thrash this out. And normally the conclusion is, yeah, there's no magic way to speed this up, but what you want to do is make sure that the costs are reduced and the quality is improved, really. So tell us a little bit more about this thing. There's one thing that came up a while ago in such a discussion was the question of when you're, say you're running a $3 or $4 million a year business, something along those lines, you're probably going to be your own product development manager to some degree. But you're going to have to work with other people who are between you and the factory, or even within the factory, between you and the actual guys who just say, right, let's order 1,000 or 10,000 of these units to develop the products. How important is it to get somebody who's got very specific product knowledge in, say, working with ABS plastic as opposed to PQ plastic or PE plastic, if I've even got those abbreviations right?
Well, we love our clients who know what they want. We love it when a client that comes to us and says, these are the exact specifications. This is the tolerance that it can be, the tolerance of error that we can have in certain measurements. Those are great. Those are really easy to quote on quickly. It's much easier than the client that comes to us and says, women's products, I see an opportunity in that. Can you make me something cool? Or obviously there's some other clients love a bit more, obviously a bit more understanding what they'd like to create than that. But it's on a spectrum, and if a client has a general direction, we'll work with them. But they don't have to be experts on their product area, and that's kind of a service that we try to offer. That we can maybe, hopefully, we can save you the cost of employing 1 or 2 employees in your home country just by working with us. That we have our experts here, and our experts are going to cost less than your experts.
That's a good
so
point.
Yeah.
I think also what struck me very strongly with the conversation with a couple of guys who are definitely creating very much custom products. And by the way, they're doing way better with them in terms of profitability and sustainable profit than with private label products. So just to reinforce the point you're making, I can say from experience with not my personal experience, but my friends of mine who are doing that, definitely worth it. Absolutely 100%. So, which is why I've got you on the show, because I know how important this is. And I think it's only going to be more important. But he was saying about how when you're creating a product, and I can't remember what the materials are, so I'm not going to break any confidence because I can't remember, but he had a product that was made of two different types of materials. Maybe one was foam and then it was some form of plastic. And now I know from this conversation with you just how many types of plastic there are. I had a vague sense of that. And he was saying
there's many more.
Many more, I'm sure. I'm sure there are.
There's patented types of plastic out there that DuPont and the major international companies are selling. If you need very specific things that'll handle super high temperatures and whatnot.
No, I'm sure, but without blowing people's brains with more specifics. But the point being that he was trying to create a product that was made of some foam and some plastic, say. I think that's what it was. And he said, actually, he realized that that between him as basically the product development manager for his company, and he needs to be in a way because he knows what his customer wants. He knows where the company needs to go and what they stand for, and therefore what their products are and the price point versus quality and the positioning in the market and all that stuff. But between him and the manufacturer, he was realizing that he was needing to employ experts in very, very specific types of manufacturing. And so it sounds like you would be able to substitute for that. So instead of having to employ somebody who knows all about how foam behaves in different situations and how that would work within your products, you guys would be able to provide some kind of service like that. Is that about right?
We can definitely be a part of that process, and it is reasonable to say that yes, you might be able to save a hire or two or a consultant or two in your native country by working with a company like ours. But I also don't want to totally undermine the value of in-house, knowing the direction that you want to go, knowing what you want to get done. But hopefully with our services, it wouldn't be an essential thing that you'd have to do.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So now let's move on to a very different point, but obviously one that, again, anyone who's been around the block with the Chinese factories generally will be very conscious of. Not to say that America as a whole is conscious of, because that's one of Trump's probably very accurate claims, is that the Chinese have very little respect for intellectual property, or at least often in many cases. So tell us how you deal with that kind of whole pain of basically intellectual property theft. Not to put too fine a point.
Yeah. And I mean, there's not only theft, but there's if you have a very common product with no patent protections, there's no law that says that company can't sell it to someone else. And of course, if you're just sourcing, they're already selling it to multiple people. But we try to not sell to people that would be competing against our competitors. It's not something that we can always perfectly balance, but our goal is to work with a smaller number of larger clients and try to be respectful enough of their special places in the market. Now, of course, if you're investing in a mold, no one else is going to use that mold. So unlike some Chinese factories, and I don't want to say all, but unlike some Chinese factories, we're not going to be selling your product out the back door to other people.
Yeah,
Can't guarantee that some other third party might see it on Amazon and develop their own molds. That's something we can't prevent.
No, of course.
But as far as the things that people are investing in that we're directly involved in, that's just trust is a big thing we try to build with our clients and offer as unique, distinctive.
So I guess owning a mold is a kind of interesting balance between the purely legal protection of a patent, which of course one should probably try and get, but is way more expensive traditionally than just the mold costs you like $1,000 or something.
Not always possible in all product situations either.
Yeah. But I mean, obviously we'd get lawyers on to talk about that, and I'm sure we will. But your side of it is if you own the mold and it's a unique mold, at least you've got a physical kind of limitation for people just copying it. And yeah, sure, if they get it off Amazon and send it to a Chinese factory and say, make a mold for this, then I guess you're going to get some people copying you. But that's quite different from the whole thing of, as you say, them sending it out the back door. So how do you deal? I mean, do you even have any way of handling that situation? How do you deal with the backdoor sales, as it were? Say I've created some plastic mold for, sort of, let's say key fobs or something for the sake of argument, or key sized objects. I've got a mold that has 20 cavities in it, so I can produce lots of variations. They're selling really well. And I paid you guys, $10,000 to get the mold made. What sort of protection would I have around that, if any?
Yeah, so for all the key processes that we commonly do, we work directly with just the same manufacturers that we have a very, very close relationship with. Metal supplier is we consider them part of our company. My mother calls the boss her Chinese son. So uh, yeah, we just an extension of our factory. Our mold maker is the same way. We have our own room within their factory, a locked room where all our molds are kept. We have some very specific camouflage patterns that we work with the clients that they paid a few $1,000s to develop for textile printing, and we have those in locked tubes for when they're needed for screen printing on the fabric. So we don't actually own the factory that does the printing on the textiles, but we make sure that our screens are locked up there.
That makes sense. So in other words, it comes down to the quality of the relationships, and then having procedures in place that are common sense, like physically locking things away. And I guess like anything else, if somebody wants to break in, I always think of the famous story of the Concorde development back in the 60s. And in Paris, there was just some Soviet spy who was a chief engineer or something. I mean, any system can be a beast if you really want to. But I guess, look, that was Concorde, that was worth stealing. Whereas, some moderately successful product on Amazon is probably less of an incentive to break through so many barriers, right? I guess people would just go, this isn't going to happen. Let's do something different.
Yeah, if the national government wants to get a hold of your mold, I might not be able to prevent that.
Yeah, sure, but that's fair enough. But yeah, I think it's good to get a sense of proportion about this stuff. That not all things are equally stealable and what have you. And I suppose it's just very much the sort of things you were just saying is a bit like the kind of common sense police advice is like, most burglars are opportunists, so don't leave your windows open and make sure you've double locked your door. And then they'll probably try something else. And I'd imagine that's probably going to be true for your products in China as well, right? If there's somebody else's mold that's easy to steal, they don't have a close relationship with the person who's helped develop it, they don't really care about them, and they don't have proper procedures in place to look after it, then of course it's going to be much easier to get that one and just produce products out the back door, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah, and I mean it's for some of the factories out there. That's just the MO for business. That's if anyone comes willing to offer money, they'll make those products regardless of who paid for the mold. Again, not every factory in China is like that, but there's enough that it's a concern.
Yeah, so I guess it comes down to, again, one reason to work with somebody like yourself is just because you have those close relationships and that trust. I mean, and this is another thing that came up in the conversation, is that the obsession with getting somebody on the ground in China you can trust, and mostly we've come back down, whether rightly or wrongly, and I suppose there can be accusations of racism here that might be fair as well, but rightly or wrongly, people are tending to think about British people or Americans on the ground. I guess partly because culturally, there's a connection with a British or American person who understands
We all
the
tend to go
traditional
with
ways
what's
of business.
familiar to us.
Yeah, and things that are familiar and ways of operating, and I suppose a culture as well of operating. For example, I mean, this is one of the things that I've always experienced, and it'd be interesting to talk to you about this. That when I speak to a Chinese manufacturer, sometimes I still forget that in East Asian culture, in China or Japan, it's basically very rude to say no. So if I say, "Can you do this for X Y Z date?" If I phrase things in a crass way, for an American particularly, that's very normal. For Brits, that's still a bit aggressive because we are a little bit like the Asians in the sense of not wanting to be rude. But yeah, we'll ultimately say, I'm so sorry, old chap, I can't do that. But the Chinese would just say yes and then not do it. So is there a way around that you've found? Is that a cultural difference we can overcome in some way?
That's definitely a Chinese cultural thing. Yes, saying no is not common. In business, I mean, I don't know how much that's going to play a part in business, but I guess what I see a lot is that if a factory can't do something, yeah, there's both because of the financial incentive as well. They're going to want to come back to you and say, sure, we can do that, but they're going to get you something that's 2/3 of the way of what you actually wanted. Would be a more common situation, as you say, both because of the cultural reason and because of the financial incentive. What would I recommend for someone trying to get around that problem? Just really pin down your supplier, or just really talk them through, make them repeat over and over in writing or in a contract. Now, contracts, of course, are very hard to enforce internationally, but still, get them to put it down in writing. What, you're sure you can hit the specifications. You're sure that's not going to be a problem. All right, put that in the purchasing order for me, so that we can all see it there later.
Yeah. Okay. So like getting things down in writing and being very specific. I think the word pin down is the phrase that always springs to mind for me. I mean, this is only, mind you, with private label products with minimum tweaks. It's still an issue. Like, okay, can you make this? I mean, I'm just thinking about the things like, can you make this with the satin finish? Yes, no problem at all. And then they produce it with a sort of hard plastic, shiny gloss finish, for example, with a plastic product that I had made. And you just think, sorry, which bit of the conversation didn't we get here? So I guess it comes down to getting
It could have
photographs.
been a communication issue,
It
or
could
it
have
could
been.
have been as just the issue you were referring to a moment ago. It's hard to say, but yeah, that's a lot of my life, wading through those problems. Samples. Actually, that would be my strong advice. Just don't get the 10,000 pieces and then inspect them. Get that sample. Make sure that's actually our business's core quality control key point is just about, we're not going to make something until you've approved the sample. Some of our clients who want things yesterday, they're going to say, it's all right, I'm sure it'll be fine, send it to me anyway, or just send me the mass product anyway, get it on the ocean first. I all the I try to really resist that at all costs, and just you need to get the sample in hand and tell us it's okay after you get the sample in hand, and make sure. If you say it's okay, we can ensure that all the rest of the product's going to be manufactured to the same specifications as that. So for a buyer who's dealing with another Chinese party, I would strongly recommend that as well, both for the communication issue or for that. There's a phrase in Chinese called "cha bu", which means close enough, but it's a very, very dangerous phrase in the manufacturing world.
Close enough, yeah. That sounds incredibly worrying. That phrase, if you're going to get stuff manufactured. And yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think I'm sure that your resistance comes from the hard experience of many, many years. I mean, absolutely. I'm one of those classic impatient people and say, oh, it will be good enough, because I'm used to Western levels of quality control, which generally there's so much regulation in the European Union and I guess in America around this stuff. It doesn't guarantee you're going to get great stuff either. But I mean, I think that, or Japan, I mean, that they got such high quality control built into the processes now, thanks to people like Denning and then Toyota, and it's come back from the Denning idea in America, went over to, the Japanese bought it wholesale, and then it's gradually come back into, for example, American car manufacturing. But yeah, it somehow just isn't built in with Chinese stuff. And I guess as spoiled Western consumers, we forget that. And I can't agree more that whenever I've tried to speed the process up and skip stuff, it's always bitten me so hard in the bum. I'm never going to do that again. If, for example, even skipping pre-shipment inspection, my partner and I just imported like 200 units or something. It's just a little test order, and we couldn't be bothered to pay for QC. But then he spent 6 hours going through some boxes yesterday or whatever, a day before, just finding a bunch of defects that if we got it inspected in China, somebody on a much lower wage would have caught those. So yeah, another example.
Well, you have to weigh your risks with everything. Is the risk of it all turning out terrible? Having very few sellable products, is that worth the cost of inspecting for a small project? Obviously, for larger projects, it's worth it.
Even small projects. I mean, it's what surprised me in that tiny little example with the 200 units or something that is private label. Somebody else is doing the manufacturing. Somebody else has dealt with everything, and we just kind of, got a special arrangement with somebody to just get a few units of it to sort of test out new products. But the point being, even in that silly little scenario, it still wasn't worth skipping QC. even though it seemed like it wouldn't. How could it possibly be worth spending $100 on this thing that was only going to cost us a few hundred? So yeah, there's an example that it's
Well,
never worth skipping.
with custom manufacturing and QC, that every product is also very different. Again, is again true here. I mean, if you have a plastic part that's just out of a plastic mold, really checking. I can't say it's universally true, but checking one and checking them all of them is generally going to be the same. There are issues that could go wrong, so I don't want to say that absolutely. But a batch is a batch, and shipping over you off of that batch serves the purpose largely. But then again, if you really want to be 100% sure, then QC inspection might still be appropriate in that, but you have to make that call yourself. I noticed one thing in the Chinese just economy that's added to this, that's kind of where some of this mentality is derived from, is the cost of manufacturing has traditionally been so cheap here. Obviously, it's a little more expensive than it was 10 and 15 and 20 years ago, but it's traditionally been so cheap that a lot of the factories have the mentality of, it's going to be cheaper and faster to just take a swing at this and hope we understood the client's what the client was after here, or do it this cheaper way that we know the client didn't really want, but we're still going to try it this cheaper way. Send them some samples, send them some products, see if it's approved so that we can make some better margin. And if it's not, we'll come back and we'll redo the whole thing.
And that makes sense. I mean, I guess that's why the pre-shipment inspection is so important, because of that mentality. And it does make sense. I mean, there is a logic that drives all these situations. I mean, culture comes from, I think, necessity sometimes. I mean, discuss. Okay, this is a very deep anthropological question, but I do think, yeah, you're right about if the cost of labor is super cheap, you just throw more labor at it. And that's why I guess having the traditionally with the private label products anyway, the way that I've always done it, the usual 70-30 split, so or whatever you can get, 30% down up front, and then you hold 70% until they've actually got it right. But the downside, of course, is you've got to be prepared for them to take the whatever time it takes to produce the new run and replace that stuff, right? So that's kind of a crude solution. Do you suggest having quality control or inspections earlier in the process when you're dealing with custom manufacturing?
Yes, for sure. Every project's different, but yeah, we try to save ourselves cost and risk. We try to do different checks at as many steps as possible. So if we're doing, let's just say a tent with maybe some custom plastic in it. So yeah, we'll show the client the CAD drawings for it, have them approve those, and then we're getting to fabric, and so we're going to send the client the fabric strips, or at least we're going to talk through them, send pictures, maybe make a prototype with that fabric before we go off and run the hundreds of rolls or whatever it might be for that. Because if we think we understand what the client was after, and we custom weave hundreds of rolls of fabric, and then the client says, "Oh no, we didn't talk about how thick this fabric needed to be." Oh well, we're all in trouble at that point. So yeah, as much as you can be a part of the process, confirming the materials, confirming different steps, that's great. Sometimes there's a prototype involved. Sometimes we've got our final product, our raw materials. Every project's different, but yeah, more communication, the better chance you have of not ending up with the wrong thing when it shows up at your door. Or because even when you go for a quality inspection and you've got 10,000 pink t-shirts when you wanted 10,000 red t-shirts, that's a problem for both of you still. You put 30% down, and ideally that manufacturer is going to say sorry, but and rerun it all. But as you pointed out already, at the least you've lost time, which might be very critical for your business model. I've lost you on the audio.
Right, we're back. Sorry.
You're back.
Back, sorry. Quality control problems with my mic. I need to get a new one, probably. Yeah. So as you say, it comes back to that old thing that carpenters used to say, right, which is measure twice, cut once. And I guess that in the case of manufacturing a custom manufactured product with a serious number of run of pieces or units, measure like 10 times is better. And the other thing to say is this concept that Ashley Pierce talked about, who's a member of the 10K Collective. So he's actually doing relatively modest numbers relative to the sort of level you're talking about, probably. I don't know what sorts of turnover, but he had 100K Christmas, last year. So, but he's got a manufacturing background. He was talking about the way that he would do it, and he talked on the podcast at some length about different subjects. But one thing was, he said, I think he basically nicked the idea from Tesco's or some major British company, which is that they have a bronze, silver, and a gold sample. So in other words, you don't even go in with the mentality as the buyer of the products, of thinking that it's going to be right first time or even second time. You go in with the mentality, okay, here's a rough sample that comes back after the initial discussions, and you go, okay, well, this is good, this is good, this is good, that's rough, that's the wrong material, that's actually not flexible enough, it doesn't perform its function. And by the way, I'd forgotten that, like you said, you know what, I completely forgot to talk about the thickness of the fabric. That's really stupid of me. Well, can we make it a millimeter thicker or whatever? You go back, you have the silver sample, you come back and say, yeah, that's pretty good actually, but it needs this. You still got some rough edges here, blah, blah, blah. And then they bring back the gold sample, which in theory, if life has neatly played ball, then that is your manufacturing sample. Yeah. So presumably that's just another way of putting all the stuff you've been implying the whole time, right? So to sample, like you said.
So yeah, when we start talking with the client, I have to try to figure out and sort through in my mind, what are they ready for here? Are they ready for prototyping? Are they ready for sampling? Or are we ready to move into an order, which is going to include a sample process? But when you put 30% down, we're going to move towards what we might call a production sample. If all the details are clear, then we're into a production sample where we're buying the raw materials in bulk and making that happen. Now, there's always going to be some tension there, how to wade through that. If we're doing a tent and you need a very custom material that's very unique and a very specific color, and we're trying to do a prototype without putting our 30% down, there's going to be a problem there, because the minimum to weave and dye a fabric is going to be, maybe it's going to be thousands of dollars worth of product, at least, and no one wants to spend thousands of dollars on your typical prototype. So there's some tension about how to balance that. How approximate do you need your prototype to be, your sample to be, conceptual sample, before we get to a production sample, which production sample means, hey, whatever we have here and you're approving, that's what you get at your door in a number.
That's what you're going to get in bulk, right? Oh, that's an interesting point, though. I think the tension between these different things is just part and parcel of, I think, the entrepreneur, if they're really standing back from the process and thinking in a properly business-like way, that back and forth is part of the decision of what sort of product line to pursue, right? I mean, you think this fabric, this type of tent with a really differentiated look and feel could really be differentiated from everything else out there. It's going to be unique, custom in manufacturing, so therefore it's going to be defensible. That sounds great. The budget looks like XYZ on paper, but then you go in, and actually one barrier to entry that could be too big a risk would be to spend $10,000 just to get the prototype done, and you discover it's not what you want. That's part of the investment of your time and money that your company should be making, that I think is the right call for man. In other words, how can I put this? Things don't go in a linear way. They don't go, right, idea, talk to manufacturer, make the prototype, do the next thing, do the next thing, do the next thing, done. It's a back and forth process. And part of that process is discovering in the nuts and bolts way of, actually, you know what, we shouldn't be doing this. This doesn't make sense for a company.
That happens.
Yeah. And that's real life, right? And I just think it's odd how long that life should be linear and go from A to Z in one nice way, how long that mentality persists. And what I think that means is, even for a very good entrepreneur, that they end up giving themselves a hard time because they haven't got a product out the door because they gave themselves 6 months to do it, when they didn't allow for the fact that 6 months is a good goal, but we aren't obsessed with that being a reality. And also this product line may not pan out, and that's fine, because that's part of life. As long as you've got more than one iron in the fire, it's okay, right?
Yeah, when those kind of things happen, most of my clients, they know they're part of the process and we're part of the process. But occasionally, we'll have the client who they're making changes. They're saying, yeah, okay, we do the prototype if they want. And they're making changes. We're redoing a prototype. There's some minor costs involved in all the back and forth. And then they get frustrated with the timeline when they didn't come to us with all the details. And they're making changes as they see things and play with things in their hands. And they just can't handle the timeline that's resulting from it. And that's, as you say, just part of one of the entrepreneurial challenges that we have to balance and see how fast we can push through this with still getting everything we want.
Absolutely. I mean, I just think, just to come back to that again, I mean, just to hammer this home, one of the definitions of economics is the allocation of scarce resources. In other words, there is a limited amount of time and money available, and the art is allocating it. And in other words, so that implies it's not always going to work out. And it's the decision of where to put it is, I think, the ultimate entrepreneurial or even investor decision. But also, yeah, as you said, I mean, if you're going to move the goalpost yourself, and my God, I've been that person so many times, so I feel a bit guilty now, but I've been the person making a process last longer. And another thing, my coach, Jason Miles, who's not a custom manufacturer person, but runs Shopify training and Shopify store, he says, look, there's a continuum between speed and quality. And again, that's another decision that entrepreneurs to make. If you think Christmas is coming up in 9 months' time and you can get a product out for Christmas and make a killing, even if it's not the most amazingly produced products in the world, then that's a speed, pushes you towards speed in a very calm business-led decision, just impatience, versus if something's out there already and the market, the minimum viable product needs to be very, very good, then you're just going to have to take longer. And you're right to reject sample after sample. And I guess, as you say, the cost of that is it takes you 18 months to get out the door. And that's how it is. So,
yeah. And we deal with a lot of different clients, and, there's both sides of the spectrum of clients that we've dealt with, some that are just meticulous, and some that are just whatever, doesn't matter. Just get me something out the door. And so we try to balance both of those out and keep things at a good pace. But yeah,
I mean, the whatever, get it out of the door mentality. I mean, the only thing I can say about that is that the Amazon customer, as we all know, is not very good at whatever it does the job. If there's some tiny wrinkle on the packaging and they're having a bad hair day, suddenly you got a 1-star review looking at you, right? And then it's going to take a lot of work and expense to get a 5-star review, particularly now. It's so hard to get reviews without risking your account. So yeah.
I'll tell you one frustration I've had with that type of client before is that they'll say any color's fine, make it whatever color you think best. Okay, make it whatever color we make, and then they get a couple negative reviews. Pink? Why'd you do it in pink? And they come back to me, why'd you do it in pink?
Yeah, passing of bucks. Number one, right? Yeah. I mean, yeah, if you fail to make a decision, you basically, you're responsible for what it results, I think. And I guess, again, a lot of it comes down to entrepreneurial responsibility, right? You're in charge, but you're also responsible. So like, if you make a stupid decision, then it's good to be grown up enough to own up to it. Let's just deal with the final area that I think you guys deal with, which is the whole question of freight, because obviously, as you said, supply chain is the right word. So we're going earlier in the supply chain, but once you've created the mold and all the prototype and all the pain and excitement as well of all of that stuff, you've got 10,000 units waiting somewhere on the edge of a Chinese factory. Obviously, the rest of the supply chain is not inconsiderable, both in terms of the cost and the time. We've talked about those two key metrics, money and time. Is that something you guys deal with?
Absolutely. It's another one of our unique values we try to offer our clients. We do monthly shipments to our warehouse in the U.S. We also have a U.S. company that we own, that we ship to our warehouse there, where we can break up our shipments for our various clients. It creates a lot, and we handle the importing there as well. So for our smaller clients that are importing a couple, 2-3 pallets at a time, it saves them a ton of money, because your minimum cost for importing a single paper clip, if you ship it ocean, might cost you around $700 to $800 just to import that one thing, just as the paperwork and the warehouse.
I love the idea of sea shipping a paperclip, by the way, but that's like the rawest test of the basic raw number, right? That's a kind of fun experiment. $700. Okay.
Your minimum costs there. And so for that client that needs us to ship a paperclip, well, we'll tell them go away. But but in theory, for that client who has the small shipment, that we can save them $650 off of that because we're sharing those costs amongst one or multiple containers in a shipment.
And that's really huge, actually. I want to underscore just how absolutely huge that is, because otherwise minimum order quantities aren't so much about the manufacturer side as what will work with the container. And you can do all sorts of very complex maths to figure out the optimization of stuffing a container. But in the end of the day, if your minimum shipping unit is a container, you have to be dealing in rather frightening amounts of bulk, and that increases risk, right?
Depending on the product, yeah, definitely. Yeah. And so, yeah, we do all the, if our clients choose to have our company be the importer, then we can handle all the importing process. We can advise on the probable tax rates beforehand. We're the importer. We handle all those paperwork, and we ship our clients' products directly to FBA as they request. You gotta send us all your labels and line that up beforehand, but we can slap labels on everything and get it to your FBA warehouse when you're just shipping in smaller pallet size. And then, yeah, tariffs and the import duties, we do our best to navigate that. If you want us to commit to a delivered door-to-door price with tariffs, we can commit to that. Or you might actually, we're gonna, if it's not a clear categorization, we're gonna add a few percentage points in there. If it is a clear categorization, we'll quote you what the expected cost there is. But if you wanna pay those yourselves, we can just advise on what it's probably gonna be, and we'll see what it is after it's imported. Right now with the Trump-China trade wars, there's a lot of uncertainty there as well. Don't know if that's dating our conversation right now and how that's gonna work out in the short term. It might all go away next month, or it might get a lot more intense. But we try to be on top of that as well, and could advise our clients about what they expect if they start a project right now versus January, February. There's going to be some shifts in that if they don't work things out. The nice thing about the trade war, though, is the Chinese currency has gone down 10%. And so a lot of the tariffs right now are 10%, but the currency is a little more complicated than this and the effects of it. But if you're ordering a product last year that you're still ordering this year, and you haven't inquired with your supplier about, hey, can we get a lower price on this based on the US dollar price, because Chinese currency is down.
Interesting. So presumably that's down against the dollar, by the way. I haven't checked it against the pound because
against the dollar. Chinese currency is generally down because of the trade war. So product prices in Chinese in any currency should be lower than last year. Of course, in the long term, that starts to affect raw materials, and it's a complicated thing.
Yeah.
But certainly,
so if you're listening in sort of autumn 2018 when we're recording this, I guess that's a very hot tip, actually, because I hadn't really thought that one through, and I thought, okay, the other competition, I thought it in terms of the economics, but obviously all the importers from China who are selling on Amazon, for that matter, anywhere else in the US, are going to be adding, whatever the net amount is of the tariffs, and thus the market price as a whole will go up, and then basically the competition will be around the same price probably, and it turns out to be true in some markets and not others. But what I hadn't really thought about is the effects on the Chinese currency, and thus ultimately that balances back out. So that's a really important insight you've just gained. So so it's really worth going back to your manufacturer.
I think at the moment we're down about 11. Yeah, we're down about 11% versus the U.S. dollar versus before the trade wars started, and most of the tariffs are at 10%, and at least getting 5% cheaper out of your manufacturer should be a strong possibility.
Excellent. Well, that's a really, really top tip. I mean, talk about a tactical tip with a massive impact. That's fantastic. So thank you for pointing that out. So yeah, it just really sounds like you can do almost a sort of wave process. So you can create a product from a sketch on a back of a napkin and an idea, and then get it all the way through manufacturing and get it across the US and into Amazon, or for that matter, anywhere else.
We have made products that started with clients' napkin sketches.
That is amazing. So you guys really are some powerful people to know. And I think, if I were looking for an answer, and this is not some kind of and this is real, it's not just artificially made up, but if I were looking for an answer to this person saying, God, I just really need an American manufacturer, American kind of contact on the ground in China to help me develop my custom products. And if I'd known about you guys at that point, it would have been a very normal thing to say, you know what, actually, you should check these guys out, Ryan Shaffett of XQ Manufacturing. They seem to know their business. So that's a British way of saying they're awesome, by the way. So that sounds rather understated to American ears, I'm sure. But their business there's a high praise as far as I'm concerned. So tell us a little bit more, Ryan, about if somebody wants to get in touch with you or find out more about XQ, to make sure I get it right, XQ Manufacturing. How do they get in touch?
Sure. Yeah, visit our webpage at xqmanufacturing.com. Send me an email at rs@xqmanufacturing.com. Love to start a conversation. You know, all projects start with a good conversation, trying to understand what you are after. We try to move to general quotes pretty quickly, depending on the project, and we can quote you out on your project, or at least give you a ballpark at what you might be expecting, and it'll help you evaluate if this is something, help you save time as you evaluate, is this something you want to continue pushing forward with, or maybe need to find another product that might pencil out better.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that always strikes me, is that if somebody like yourself is willing to have a conversation with somebody, that conversation in itself is very, very valuable, because you've been here and bought the t-shirt, gone to all the rodeos and, you know, all the other cliches. You've done this a billion times. Whereas for most people, even those who are relative to private label manufacturers, quite big players doing a few $1 million a year, in the wider scheme of things, they have very, very little experience of custom manufacturing unless they happen to have been doing it. So
and even if
it's extremely worth a conversation with you, if nothing else.
Yeah, and even for those clients who have a fairly good direction about what they want, just as a manufacturer, we love to, you know, hopefully we're still able to advise them about, you know, have you considered this or that? That might save you a lot of per piece cost on this, or allow you later flexibility down the road. And just from a manufacturer's perspective, be able to hopefully chime in and add to the conversation, even for those who already have a pretty solid direction about what they want to see as an end product.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And here's the other thing that always strikes me. And if you look at someone like Tiger Woods, I mean, he's probably not the flavor of the month anymore from the last few years, but he was a go-to quote at one point. He had 7 coaches. And that's not because the guy can't play golf. The guy could play golf because he had 7 coaches. So in other words, if you're humble enough to ask an expert in an area where it's manufacturing, or get a cost accountant in, or you know, an intellectual property lawyer, or whatever it is, you're humble enough to ask an expert their opinion, they may well tweak processes you've been doing for a decade and save you a ton of hassle or money, right? It's always worth asking an expert. So that's why we have you on the show. So Ryan, just remains for me to say, very insightful. I've probably asked a lot of dumb newbie questions, but I guess that at least a certain percentage of the listeners, even if they're doing what by our lights are some decent numbers on Amazon, are still going to have some of those questions, but also some very clear-minded answers on some quite complex topics. And also, obviously, you sound like a very, very good person to just have a conversation with, at the very least, if you're considering doing custom manufacturing. So thank you very, very much for coming on the show.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to do this, and thanks for giving me the opportunity.
A pleasure.